Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. You can see the countdown clock on the screen. We're just giving everyone a chance to join in. So please take a minute, stretch your legs, get yourself a glass of water, get yourself a cup of coffee. Sit back and enjoy. We'll be starting in just about 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today's webinar is going to be focused on project management. Before we do that, I know that we have some people here with us today who are new to Past Concept, so I'll be going over a little bit of the basics of Past Concept before we dive right in to project management. Also, our marketing team has asked me to remind you guys, please, if you have a moment, go ahead and go on to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, like and follow Past Concept for more webinars like this one. We'll be doing them frequently over the course of the coming months, and we hope you enjoy them. All right, and without further ado, let's dive right into it. Project management, from opportunity to project completion, Past Concept has you covered. Now, for those of you who are new to Past Concept is a web-based application that helps you cover the entire life cycle of a project. It was originally built for one engineering company a little over 10 years ago. Now, after the first couple of years, we realized that it might be something that would help a larger audience, a larger bandwidth of companies, including architectural firms, land surveying firms. So what we did was we went ahead and went into the field and tested this theory. Now, immediately, the first thing we learned was that every business is unique, but that the issues and hurdles and challenges that they have were not. We started to see the same issues come up time and time again. Among those were these three. Many of these companies had many moving parts. They had different pieces of software that covered different elements of their company. They might have a CRM where they manage all of their contacts, and they might be using Word to make their proposals, sending them out through Outlook, and then if they're so lucky as to have that proposal be signed, then populating that onto an Excel spreadsheet, for example, or some type of project management software. What did we notice? We noticed that this was really inefficient. Oftentimes, even in that scenario that I just explained, we saw client information being pulled from the CRM and then added to the proposal. Then when the proposal was complete, having both the project information and the client information have to be pulled and then entered into a separate project or a separate program. And it just was really redundant. And redundancy breeds inefficiency, and inefficiency will always affect you in your bottom dollar. The other big thing we noticed was that even though everyone that we shadowed were consummate professionals, they oftentimes led by intuition. They weren't really sure how they were doing on budget. They had an idea of how they were doing on budget. And if we ever asked for reports on that front or some type of analysis, oftentimes the answer was, hey, we'll get back to you on that. Give us a week to pull up the numbers. Now, we firmly believe that this is something that any business should have at their fingertips. They should be able to see these things, which allows them to move in a much more agile way and avoid some missteps or avoid some issues that might be coming down the line. The last big thing, and we primarily noticed this on companies that were in the process of growth, that were bringing on new employees, was many hands on one project. When one project had to be shared amongst different employees, sometimes the communication cycles became a bit, well, for lack of a better word, clunky. You would have emails be sent to one person but not another. You would have files be downloaded, modified, and then 3 or 4 different variations of that file. They oftentimes just didn't have a centralized repository for both communication and for file sharing. And that's where we come in. Past Concept, as I mentioned before, is a web-based application, which means that you can log on to it from any device with a browser and an internet connection. We found this to be really helpful for a number of companies over the course of the last 2 years specifically. But it means that you don't need to download something on a specific computer. And if you as an administrator or principal of your company were out of the office or were at home or were in any location where you had your computer but were not connected to your office, you'd have the ability to check pretty much anything having to do with your company. But more importantly, as I mentioned before, we cover the entire life cycle of a project. And what do I mean by that? Well, hopefully this next slide will help elucidate that a little bit. Here you have all the elements that sort of revolve around a company. You've got clients and contacts, opportunities, proposals, projects, employee tracking, invoice management. These are all the elements that are touched over the lifetime of a project. For example, even before you have the notion of an idea that an individual might be a prospective client, you may already have their contact information. And if so, you can always enter it directly into Past Concept in our CRM area. Once that lead matures to the point where you can start conversing about a potential business you might have with them, well, we have a module that helps with that. And that's the opportunities module where you can track all these things and make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. There's no opportunities left behind, if you will. Beyond that, once you have collected enough information from the client to be able to give them a rich proposal, we have a module that helps with that. You can either convert your opportunity directly into a proposal with one click, or you can create a proposal from scratch. The process is very simple. Like I mentioned before, please do follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And for other webinars, we're going to be having another one in regards to proposal creation and proposal management, where we'll dive a little bit deeper into that subject as well. But the process is very simple with Past Concept because rather than, and I'm assuming many of you may already have, sort of master templates that you create your proposals from, rather than having a master template, what we do is we break that master template into various catalogs, a catalog of terms and conditions for a specific type of work, a catalog of tasks, a catalog of phases, even a catalog of payment schedules in regards to, how a specific project is meant to be paid out on behalf of the client. And that leads us to the jobs. Now, something to keep in mind, Past Concept does help with a number of things. For example, the transition from proposal to project is a very smooth one because most of the information needed for your project comes from your proposal, your scope of work, the potential invoices that are going to be created in function of this project. All of that is detailed within the proposal. And when the client accepts that proposal, a job is automatically generated and inherits that richness of information, which, while we won't be covering it today, is a big part of what makes this process so smooth with Past Concept. Beyond that, of course, there's employee tracking as well, where you can have your employees enter their time, you can assign time to employees, and we'll go over that a little bit more today. Same thing with invoice management. The managing of those invoices, the generation of those invoices, the tracking of those invoices, making sure that invoices are sent when they're supposed to be sent, that they reflect the accurate amount. All these things we'll be covering today. Because, as we mentioned at the top, today we are focusing on project management. Now, for us, project management really, really, really has its heart in these 5 elements: your job list, your job detail, your scope of work, time tracking, and billing. So let's dive right in, shall we? The first one on the list is your job lists. In Past Concept, you have multiple views for how you can see your job. Of course, there is a standardized list, which is essentially what you would picture similar to an Excel sheet, but it gives you so much more of a richness and dynamic element. It even has some reporting integrated into the list itself. You have your Kanban view. For those of you that might not be familiar, I'm sure you've maybe seen it somewhere before. Kanban is a philosophy of project management. It's an agile methodology that basically, think of it this way: your columns, these column areas, are reflective of your status, and within that status or within that column, you'll find cards that represent each job. The benefit of this is that, one, the cards themselves reflect key performance indicators for that job, whether it's percentage of completion or who is working on it, but also gives you some tools and features like adding, if you're a project manager, adding an employee to that job, or if you're an employee, adding time to that job. But these cards can easily be dragged and placed into a different status. This makes the process and the flow of your project managers that much smoother, because rather than having to go into each entity or into each field and change that status, they can simply drag and drop a project from status to status as they see fit. Now, a big part of project management as well, whether it's just one project or multiple projects at once, is timeline. Timeline is best demonstrated using the Gantt chart. Your Gantt chart is essentially all of your projects based on timeline, based on deadlines, and based on start dates, and placed on a timeline so you can see the overlap. And in many cases, if you are in line with completing on time, or if you're going to blow that deadline. These are good things to know long before you blow that deadline. Although I'm sure everyone here never has a problem with deadlines, obviously. Now, the final view is a Google Maps view. This view places a flag or marker at the location of each job you have in Past Concept. Now, alone, that's super helpful, but we've made it more helpful by allowing that marker to indicate the status of those jobs, Of course, in all of these scenarios, you have the ability to filter. So if you wanted to just see jobs of a specific sector, that's a filterable object. If you want to see just for one client, you can filter it down, or any combination therein. Let's say you wanted to see jobs between January 1st and February 2nd for a specific sector, for a specific client in which a specific employee worked, you could do that. Now, each list comes with its own benefits and little features, and we'll go into that in just a second. But the map view, as mentioned before, similar to the card view and the Kanban view, has a few key performance indicators that are shown: percent completion. It also shows the Google Street View and has a link to Google Maps so that you can, at any point, see the directions on how to get to a specific project of yours. Now, if we slide over into Past Concept, this is Past Concept's homepage. And of course, I'm in Acme Engineering, which, if any of you have been in these presentations before, you know is not a real company. All the information you see here is fake, but we try and reflect as close as possible to realistic projects. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and head over to our job lists. So if you notice here at the very, very top, I've gone ahead and scrolled down to jobs, and I'm able to then navigate to our jobs list. By default, I have this as my primary view, the list view. The list view gives you a lot of information right out the gate. You've got your job number, the date that the job was created, the job name, the client. If you have a project manager assigned, the other members and other team members of the project, as well as some financial information expressed in percentages. The view that you're seeing now is your standard employee view. This is not an administrator view. This is specifically made for your average employee. Here, the amount collected is shown by a percentage of the total invoiced amount, and the percent of budget used is shown as a percentage as well. Let's take a closer look at one of the projects. So here in project 220004 Venture Mutual, it looks as though of the amount that has been invoiced to date, 30% of that has been collected. However, in regards to the budget, it seems as though we've consumed 43% of that budget. So I know, okay, well, we're almost about 50% of the way done with this, with the budget. Now, I, as a project manager, may want to see how we stand in regards to the overall completion of this project. Additionally, you can see that the last column has the status under which each one of these projects currently stands. Moreover, immediately under that status is the length of time in which that project has been in that status. In fact, it looks like this project has been under review for 65 days, 8 hours, and 57 minutes. Just a little piece of helpful information. Now, there are a couple of other things, maybe may have caught some of your eyes already, that exist within this list. The first of which is the filter. This filter is a hideable filter so that you can maximize the use of space on your screen. But here are the filters I mentioned before. You can have time range, you can have specific date ranges, you can filter by balance, by specific employees, so on and so forth. In fact, there's even a feature for favorites. You can mark specific jobs as favorites, which will help you filter them out very quickly. Beyond this, the list that you see below you is dynamic. Dynamic in that if I were to change this filter and filter it out, only a subset of this entire list would be seen. Why is that important? Well, because we have this view summary area. This view summary is something that certain users with certain permission are able to see, in which you can see the total budget, the budget used, billed, collected, so on and so forth, for the list that we see below. If I were to change the filter, for example, these numbers would change. If I wanted to say, see only the last 120 days for these 5 marked statuses, I would simply modify the filters, click filter, and you see the values change. The same could be true for observing one specific client and seeing how they stand with your active projects, or within a sector, or within a job type, or even within a specific tag. All of this would be able to be filtered and then viewed. Now, say for example, you were an administrator and you wanted a view that was a little bit more robust than this view. Well, the process would be very simple. At the top right-hand corner, there is this privacy view setting. Right now, this public view is on, but if I were to switch this, you would see that those percentages that I was seeing before are now represented with actual dollar values. We still have the percentages, but now we have the corresponding dollar value seen here as well. These columns are as follows: budget used, budget billing collected, the current balance for the project, and any additional fees that may be associated to the project, like subconsultant fees. Now, outside of this list, and let's go ahead and move this to all years and see the full list. Now, let's hop over to a different view. The next view down the line, that's going to be our Kanban view. As you can see, as mentioned before, we have various columns showing the different statuses. Now, in my company settings, I can show which statuses I want represented as columns and which I choose to hide. It might not make sense to have, for example, an inactive column where you have all of your inactive projects. But for your company, that may make sense. As you can see, here we have a few little features. We've got the percent of completion. We have the job number, the job name, the client. We have the due date associated with this project, the date in which the project should be completed. As I mentioned before, not a real company. Some of these dates aren't going to make sense. Or if they did, this company would be in really hot water. And then below that, you've got these little bubbles. These bubbles or badges represent the employees or team members associated to this project. The yellow represents the project manager, and the blue represents any other additional team members. Now, over on the side, we've got these two little icons. The first of which is a button for adding time. This is one of the many ways in which time entry can be done. We'll be discussing those moving down the line a little bit, but I will be referencing this one, and I guess I'll take the opportunity to show it to you now. So here, if I were working on this project and I was on this list, rather than having to navigate away from this list, go over to my timesheet, find the project, enter it, I could do so very quickly here by simply clicking on this button. As you can see, we've got a little form that pops up. It lets me enter the date, the amount of hours. I can even select the task that I was working on within this project. I can modify the percent completed, how much I've advanced on this task, enter the category, enter a note if I need to, and then add time. Now, again, because this company is a mock company, I have two options available here: add time and add billable time. Usually, in function of the job or the task, only one of these two buttons would appear. So when time is added, if it's billable time, obviously that sends the notification to the billing department, which would allow them to convert that into an invoice. That process can also be made a little bit more automatic and be automated for ease of use for your billing department. But as mentioned before, this will be discussed in the billing portion of today's webinar. After this, and just to give you guys a little bit of a demo on this, these cards, like I mentioned before, can easily be moved from one location to another, as is best suited for your company. Now, next is our timeline view. That'll be our Gantt view. You can scroll right through. Additionally, if you were a project manager and wanted to see how these timelines corresponded to your planned timelines, you'd be able to hit this planned button, and you can see, gosh, a lot of these projects, as we saw before, are well past the date that they were planned to finish. This project, for example, was slated to finish at the beginning of January of 2020, but is still ongoing. So it gives you a little bit of those indicators. And in fact, something that's really great about Past Concept is it'll take into account your method of work for any one specific project, and you can even then estimate a potential end date if you were to start allocating resources to that project when you would potentially end. If you notice, some of these span into the future of 2022. And if we were to start working primarily on this project today, we wouldn't be done until July. So that's definitely some really helpful and really powerful tools. The final view that we'll hop into is the map view. In this map view, you're able to see all the projects on a map, a sort of grid, if you will. Here, you can also hover over projects where you'll see the project number, the project percentage, the address associated to it, the client associated to it, the street view, as we mentioned before. And if you click here, it'll take you to Google Maps where you can get directions specifically to that project. Another really helpful tool, and this is true throughout all of your job views, by clicking on the job number, you're able to go into the job detail, which is in fact our next point of conversation. Now, before moving forward, I was reminded by my support staff, if you guys do have any questions, by all means, feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have people standing by to answer your questions. We have a lot to cover today. I don't know if I'll be able to get to answering them, but I assure you answers will be provided directly in the chat. So with that said, job detail. Inside Past Concept, each job is similar to a file folder. And this is true of all of the major entities in Past Concept, the opportunity, the proposal, and of course the job. When you enter into the job detail is divided into various tabs. Among those, we have job and property information, where you can easily gather information related to the project. We have a notes section, which serves similarly to like a messaging board. It allows you and your employees to enter notes, and of course for other employees to comment, question, or add to any note that's been entered therein. There is a robust expenses area where you can enter expenses associated to the job, similar to some consultant fees and managing and tracking those payments. There is a file and documents area where you can drag and drop files directly onto a project. This is exceedingly helpful as it prevents the need for an outside third party like Dropbox or Google Drive, but also, more importantly, eliminates the need to send files via email where multiple copies can then be created. This streamlines that process substantially. Of course, there's an employees area where you can add employees to the team. You can assign hours to specific tasks within the project to specific employees, and an activities section where you can define certain due date driven tasks like phone calls that need to happen within a certain amount of time, emails that need to be sent, tasks that need to be completed by a deadline, meetings that need to occur. Basically, anything and everything can be added to the activities area. What's great about the activities area is that not only are the employees immediately notified when they're associated to an activity, but you always see it from your homepage. So with that said, let's go ahead and check it out. So here, let's head over to the homepage. From the homepage, I've already marked a couple of projects as my favorites. We'll be using the Spellman Apothecary. So here, let's hop in. By clicking this link, I'm able to go into the job detail. The same is true basically anywhere that you see the job number. You'll be able to click on that and it'll take you to the job detail. This is the job detail. Here you can see what I was referring to with the various tabs, each corresponding to important information. Here we have job info, which is divided into 3 sections. First, we have the job detail. The job detail corresponds to a series of basic information associated to the project. Things like project manager, the client, the contact associated with the client, the department that is working on this project, the type of project that it is, very bird's eye view level information regarding the project. Now, adjacent to that, we see property detail. Property detail is an area that has a series of fields that you can enter manually based on the address. So these are things in relation to the property, the owner information, the legal description, information about the structure of the property. But one of the really fun tools that we've added to the system is this fetch property data. We've partnered with some of the largest data aggregates for property information in the US, And now, with just having the address of a property by clicking the Fetch Property Detail, you're able to get a wealth of information directly through that feature. You can get the owner's information, legal description for the property, land parcel information, structural information associated to it, as well as valuation, taxes, assessments, if that's relevant to your work. Beyond that as well, you have a financial detail. This is an area available only to employees that you've given access to, or you can see the current financial standing of the project, each individual element being a key performance indicator of the project as a whole. Beyond this, you have the scope of work, billing, and employees. Now, these three areas are so important that we've dedicated a chunk of today's webinar just to speaking about them, and we'll be getting into them later. Now, just to give you a quick overview, scope of work reflects all the work associated to this project. Each phase, each tasks, or in regards to the companies that don't have phases, just the tasks directly underneath the job itself. Billing revolves around the invoices, the sending of invoices, the receiving payment on behalf of those invoices, and generalized elements to that capacity. Employees specifically gravitates around the concept of assigning time to different employees, assigning them to different tasks, or rather assigning those tasks to those employees, giving them a set amount of hours in which they should complete said tasks. And of course, you have other tabs. For example, here we get to see the proposal that generated this job. If by chance there's a change order, that can be managed through here very easily. We'll be discussing that in our proposals webinar as well. You have the expenses area where you can add additional expenses such as sub-consultant fees. You can even track payments if you're not paying your sub-consultants all in one go. You can track all the payments that you've made to them over the lifetime of a project. Notes, which, as I mentioned before, is a messaging board related to the project itself. People can put posts and others can respond. For example, here, the original poster, in this case, Andy Bernard, posted this, and then after the fact, added a secondary comment. This may serve to be exceedingly helpful when it comes to meeting with the client, jotting down notes, and putting them somewhere that is shared amongst all of your employees. It also gives your employees and empowers them to ask questions. If, say, for example, a note is provided and something is unclear, they can very easily clarify it here. One thing that we've noticed with this area specifically is one employee may have a specific question, and frankly, perhaps many of the other employees have the same question. Rather than answering the same question 7 times, answering it just on the message board allows that message or allows that response to be related to everyone working on the project. Below that, in the same area as notes, we have any email correspondence that has been sent to the client regarding this project specifically. Times, here you can see all the time that has been entered by employees that relates to this job specifically. You can see the number of hours, the date in which it was done, the employee that entered that time, the category under which that time correlates, and of course, the specific task to which they were working on. Now, regardless of whether they enter it as a billable time or not, you as an administrator or your billing department have the ability to convert that time into an invoice. If done through this fashion, through this button, if you do add it as an invoice, it becomes a simple charge that is then added to your client's statement, or that can be sent independently for, the client to pay as they should within their allotted net terms. Beyond that, of course, you can also filter this by employee if you so chose, and you can export it so that you can have this. Say, for example, if you needed to enter it or return it or turn it into your client to show proof of work, or if there's an audit or what have you, you have this information all in one place. Beyond that, of course, as we mentioned before, the file area. This is a repository of different documents associated to the project all in one place, something that your employees, everyone working on this specific project, have access to. There are 2 important areas here. The first are the directly uploaded documents. These are things that are, and I'll show you now, specifically drag and dropped into this area, you can simply drag and drop a file, or you can select one from your computer and upload it here. Those can be viewed either in grid form or in table form, whatever is most convenient for you. On top of that, you can even mark these documents as private or public. A public document is one that you can then share with your client. A private one are ones that are only internally viewable. But if you do already have a digital document repository, such as a Dropbox, such as a Google Drive, and you have links to different documents, you can add those links here by adding a hyperlink. This will give you the ability to add the description and, of course, the link itself, making this area easily accessible from this. I've seen this used as well in regards to having the, say, for example, if you have an internal server, a server within your office, and you have an address for a specific folder in regards to this project, you can use that as a way of opening up that window so that so that documents can easily be associated into that folder. Here we have activities. We mentioned activities before. These are emails, phone calls, tasks, different things that need to be done by a specific deadline. Here you can see very quickly all of the activities associated to this project, and of course their status, if it's been completed or if it has yet to be completed, the due date associated within the description, and the person to whom it was assigned. Now, of course, they're called activities, and we do make a focus of it being emails, phone calls, meetings, that type of thing. But really, these can be drafting, it can be, making calculations or working on a specific element, or even reaching out and collecting information from the client. The system as a whole is exceedingly flexible and allows you to utilize it in a way that is best suited for your company. Now, beyond that, we've got permits, tags, transmittals, and these two other modules. These two other modules are unique and verticalized modules for companies that are inspection companies and those that are survey companies. We will be having webinars and sort of chat backs in regards to these in the future, so we'll be going more into detail with those. But for this specific session, I'd like to focus on things that revolve around project management, traditionally for architectural firms and for engineering firms. The permit tracker allows you to enter information in regards to a permit that perhaps you've submitted to the city or the county, with some additional information so that you don't lose track of where any one specific permit is at a time. And if you want to tag your projects with unique tags so that filtering them in the future is easier, say, for example, if you wanted to tag a specific project by a field that doesn't currently exist, say, based on materials used for that project or based on the type of building that it is, you can create these customized tags, tag your projects, and then when it comes time to filter, you can use that as a tool for the filtering. And with that said, we'll move on to our next chunk, scope of work. Now, we very quickly glanced at the scope of work, but really a scope of work is much more complex, much more robust. I always like to compare the relationship between a project and a proposal similar to a recipe and the actual process of cooking said recipe, right? The recipe includes the directions on how you should proceed and, of course, a list of ingredients. Here in the job, we utilize the information that's been entered in the proposal to populate the scope of work. Now, granted, the scope of work in regards to its phases and its tasks. However, after that job has been created, after that's been inherited from the proposal, it is the duty of a project manager or an administrator to go in and build those areas out. Simply having those ingredients isn't enough. You may need to prep them and prepare them in a certain way. In the same way one would dice an onion, for example. Here, it's very similar. While you have the list of phases, which is inherited, the best next step is to then enter your milestones, the dates in which these should begin, the dates at which you should be at a certain step or a progress point throughout that scope of work. The same is true of deadlines. Once you have these individual tasks, you can say, okay, well, this needs to be completed by this date, or we anticipate and hope that it be done by this time. Beyond that, of course, it's assigning these to individual employees. As the employees move and they start to work on those individual tasks and phases, they're able to, as they enter time, update the progress percentage of those tasks. Now, one of the biggest questions that we get asked is, couldn't you, based on the hours that have been assigned and the hours used, couldn't you interpret that into progress percentage? In theory, absolutely. It's not very hard to say, hey, I assigned 10 hours, they've used 5, they're 50% through it. However, more often than not, that's not an indicator of how truly far along in a project an individual is or the company is. It could be that the 50% of the project was done in the first 2 hours, but that second 50% takes a lot of time or is dependent on outside factors and needs to be completed and may take 7 hours, and the first 50% only take the first 3 hours. Additionally, and this is a less desirable scenario, say you've underestimated the time it takes that task to be completed. Say you estimated 10 hours, but really it was a 25-hour long task. It would be foolhardy to look and say, oh, well, they've used 9 hours, they must be 90% complete with that task. Simply not the case, which is why there is a distinction between time used and progress. And actually, let's hop right into it. So let's go back here and let's take a look at the scope of work. So here we have the main project as a whole. You can see the total number of hours that have been assigned, the hours that have been executed so far, the planned start date, the planned end date, when it actually got started, which is actually a month early, which is nice, and the day in which it should end if everything were to continue at the same rate that it has been worked on up until this point. Beyond that, you see the progress percentage. This top one, of course, referring to the project as a whole. In fact, if I were to close this, you would see only a bird's eye view of the project here. But let's go ahead and open this up. The next leg down would be phases. And again, I understand perhaps not all of you utilize phases, and that's okay. That would simply mean you don't have this middle step. You would go from project to tasks directly. But for other companies, it does make sense to have this information in regards to your phases. You can see a lot of information. For example, in this first phase, we can see that while 140 hours were assigned to their employees, in fact, just to get to a 92% completion, they've utilized 230 hours. And of course, you have the planned start date and the planned end date. You have the actual start date and the prospective end date in regards to these individual items. Now, let's go one step further, shall we? Here, we can see all the individual tasks. It looks as though there's been individual dates being assigned. And again, this is a fake company, so a lot of this information may not be as accurate, but you can see that one of the items is complete. Many of the other items are well into the 90% mark. And this is really the main page that a project manager would go to see the current standing of a project. Or if, say, a client called and asked to know the current status of a project, it's from here that you'd be able to tell them very easily and very quickly where the project currently stands. Now, this does have multiple views. This is a table view. You can see the Gantt chart view, which, again, let's expand it to a year. You're able to see the individual phases. You can even see the tasks and how those overlap from one to another. So you can see concurrent tasks. And as we mentioned before, if you were to see the planned, how it compares to the planned time, you can see how grossly over time this project has gone. Now, this is a really good comparison for many people to sort of kind of open their eyes as to how these elements could really help. It could be that a company working on these elements may simply know that they've blown deadlines, but don't know, if they were to put full steam ahead and continue working, when they would stand to have these elements finished. And that's where Past Concept comes in and lets you see what can be done within a certain time frame and what would go beyond your existing time frame. Beyond that, there is also a milestones page, which is really helpful. Again, this is something that is great in regards to summarizing things for clients. You're able to see the full history of the project and major items. For example, when there is a status update for the project, when there is a task update, when certain things are completed, you're able to see it completely on a timeline. Now, one of the other elements to this is how you assign time to your employees and how they enter time as they move forward. And that we'll be talking about shortly as well. So let's go ahead and move on. Time tracking is absolutely critical for any project. It is the one thing that can help you stay within budget, that can make sure that you're progressing at a rate that is sustainable for a project. And there are many ways to attack and observe this within Past Concept. The first step, of course, is assigning time to your employees. That also is done through the job detail. There are a couple ways to do it. You can either view the individual scope of work and then, say, okay, well, this is the task that I need done by a certain date, by a certain time. Perfect. We've gone over this, and I think you guys get it at this point. However, if you hop over to employees, you're able to see your list of employees, or you can even add an employee to this list. Say, for example, I wanted to assign additional time to Andy Bernard. I could simply click on his name, and I would be able to then, at the bottom where it says time by task and position, hit that add time element, which pops up this form, select a specific task, say how many hours he should be working on it, and say what type of work he'll be doing. So perhaps he's working on it as a drafter. I would hit insert, and he'd be notified that he's been assigned this additional time for this project. However, say I didn't want to add time to any of my existing employees that are already associated to this project. I wanted to add a brand new employee. The process for that is very simple. You hit this blue Add Employee button, and when you do, this list will come up. Now, granted, as we saw before, this job specifically has gone over substantially the number of hours that it should be allotted. And that's simply because we use it as an example for this. But here in the task, I can select a task. I would then select an employee, for example, Creed. Creed allows me to see a bunch of more information. For example, I can see his current employee workload. These are how many pending hours he has that he's yet to enter into the system. These are hours that have already been assigned for him to work. And in fact, looking at it, it looks like that's a pretty big number. Maybe I might want to choose a different employee, like Ryan, for example. And it looks like Ryan's got a little bit less. Maybe he's the right man for the job. So here in category, you could define the type of work that's being done. In this case, let's just go ahead and choose testing. You would enter the number of hours, say 10 hours, and then simply add employee. That would add Ryan to this list. He's been notified, hey, Ryan, congratulations. You're now working on this project. Here's what you should be doing, and here's how much time you should have to do it in. Say, for example, Ryan is doing the work, and he wants to enter it. Well, there are a couple different ways that Ryan could do that. The first, of course, is going to the job detail and next to his name, clicking on the Add Time button. That would populate, or rather pull up, a form that lets him enter his time. Now, there is another way, an alternative way as well. Say, for example, he's not in the job detail because Ryan may not have access to the job detail. It might not make sense for him to have access to that level of information, but he might have access to the Kanban board. Here, Ryan would be able to click on this little icon, which would allow him to enter time, much like the version that we saw earlier. However, there's an even better way. Here in projects, within time entry, there is a timesheet. Within timesheets, Ryan can simply add the job to his timesheet and then enter his time. This helps because every time he comes back to this timesheet, the job will already be there and he can simply select a date and enter the subsequent information. In Past Concept, we have really intuitive timesheets with some additional features that may help ease the burden from your employees when it comes to entering time. One of which is selecting this view recent. Say, for example, the pay period has ended. It's a new pay period. None of the jobs are visibly there. By clicking view recent, that would populate all of the recently entered jobs, but of course with no time entered yet. That way you can go ahead and enter that time. Now, I know many of you may be administrators and thinking, oh gosh, if I have to enter my time, it's going to take up too much of my time. Not only is it very quick, but for administrators working on specifically administrative tasks, you can enter all of your time in one click by selecting the add other time multiple option. This allows you to select a bunch of days and put that time in for it. It's something we've built specifically for administrators or administrative staff that is working on perhaps the same thing on a more regular basis and not necessarily job related. But for job related tasks, you can go day by day and add that individual time. Now, this is exportable. It can be imported into QuickBooks. It can be exported, and then if you have a third-party payroll system, we can discuss how we can best export that data to enter it into your system so that your employees don't need to enter it more than once, and your administrative staff doesn't have to enter these things manually. It would just be like an upload on that individual process. Now, there are a couple of other really big benefits to the time tracking. We already saw you can enter time from different places. Right? You can enter it from the job detail, the job list, the job Kanban board, directly on the timesheets. But you can also enter your time on our mobile app. We have a mobile app for Past Concept, which is both for iOS and for Android, and serves as a mobile version of many of the features we've seen so far. Additionally, and I know this is a big one for anyone that's requested their employees to enter time, there is a process by which you can easily send an email reminder to your employees to remind them to enter time, especially for those that have yet to enter time. Another big item is that whenever you go to your homepage, you get to actually see how many hours you've entered that week. So you know if you're behind on your hours or not. Now, I do see that we are getting close to the hour mark. I will try to get everything done within that hour time. But like I said before, if you have questions that have yet to be answered that are in the chat, by all means, if this webinar ends prior to that point, feel free to shoot us an email. You can always send an email to matt@pastconcept.com or paula@pastconcept.com or even info@pastconcept.com, and we'll be sure to respond to you as soon as possible. Now, moving forward, we also have billing management, which is perhaps one of the most important parts of project management because no one wants to do work and not get paid for it. A couple of really important things, just as we had mentioned before, that the tasks and phases are inherited from the proposal, so is billing information. Certain key information are the payment schedule associated to the job and things of that nature. Once the job is created, after the client is signed for it, Past Concept will automatically create that job and inherit things like your payment schedule. If your payment schedule is, for example, 20, 30, 50% in 3 individualized payments, those invoices will be there. They won't be sent, they won't be active, but they will exist. So your billing manager knows that these are the segmented payments for this job. Now, granted, we also understand not every job is done by percentages, and that's perfectly fine. In Past Concept, we do have a wide variety of invoices available. We have, as we mentioned before, the percentages. There is, of course, also the option for simple charges. You can also generate invoices based on time that's been entered, which we already saw once before. And of course, progress invoices that bill in accordance with the advancement of progress on any one of those individual items, whether that is a phase or whether that is a task. Beyond that, of course, some additional tools that are really helpful are the ability to schedule your invoices, but you also have the ability, and when I say schedule your invoices, I mean you can automate an invoice to be sent on a specific date without the billing department necessarily having to send it on that day. So essentially you say, hey, this invoice for X amount should be sent on the first of the month. All they have to do is during their standard working hours prior to that day, set it up, schedule it to be sent, and on the first, that invoice will be sent out to your client. Beyond that, of course, if you don't want that level of automation, you can also schedule alerts and notifications for your billing staff. They can receive notifications and alerts to let them know, hey, it's time to invoice this client. Now, one other element, which is right at the very beginning of any project, if you do have a project that has a mobilization fee, a deposit, or any amount due upon signing, you can set up your proposal to automatically direct your client to that invoice upon signing. So they will sign it and boom, they will be navigated to that invoice. Alternatively, you can also set up the system to have that invoice be sent by email to that client. Now, without wasting too much time, let's hop right into it, shall we? So let's go ahead and slide over to Past Concept. Let's go back to our home because I'm going to go ahead and use the same project we were looking at before, the Spellman Apothecary. Let's hop into Spellman Apothecary. And here we'll be exploring the Billing tab. Now, there are a few things that are really important in the Billing tab. First and foremost, you do get client information. You get their phone number, you get their name, and you get the specific contact associated to this client. In this case, Sabrina Spellman is our point of contact for this client. We also know that they have 2 pending proposals, the value of that proposal, the total job amount associated to this client, what their current balance is, if they have any open balance, and if they have anything that's past due for over 90 days. This information is front and center for your billing department. In fact, this billing element is only seen within the job, but there are entire subsegments of Past Concept that are dedicated to billing, a billing assistant, which lets them see anything and everything that might be billable in that moment or might be billable in the future. But for now, we're going to be focusing on this specific project. Again, please like and follow, subscribe on all the platforms to know when the next workshop will be. Additionally, you can also reach out to myself or Paula if you want to be put on a mailing list for these webinars. As we see, below this generalized information area, we have a job panel. This defines the budget. If the budget has increased in any way or decreased or what have you, this can be manually edited here. Additionally, you can allow for an open budget if the project is an hourly project, a scenario in which you may not necessarily have a fixed budget, but rather the client is paying per hour that you dedicate to that project. Additionally, here you can have your billing staff modify the status if by chance, you don't consider a project done until full payment is received. They can then update that here. Below that, we can see invoices that are pending to be sent. These are future invoices that are already defined at certain key milestones for a project and have yet to be sent. If an invoice has been sent, you can also see the full payment history at the bottom. In fact, let's go ahead and open this up and see all invoices. So I want to show you guys something kind of cool about the system. Here, you can see the date in which this invoice was sent, but you can also see how much the amount was and how much is due. In this case, it looks like the client paid it outright in full in one swing. If there's a partial payment, you would see that reflected here in that there's an open balance on that specific invoice. Additionally, here in the insights area, you're able to see a couple of interesting little numbers. The first of which is a date. That is the date in which the invoice was sent to the client. Next to that, you can see the number of times this invoice has been sent. On occasion, you may send an invoice 3 or 4 times before payment is made. This lets you keep track of that. How many times has this client called to ask me to send them the invoice? Next to that, and my personal favorite, is the number of times the client has seen that invoice. So the invoices are sent in email. Within that email, there's a link. That link takes them to the invoice. We track the number of times that link has been visited. This allows you, or rather gives your billing staff, a wealth of information. As you could probably put pieces together, Obviously, the conversation with a client that has never seen the invoice is very different than the conversation with a client that says they've never seen it, but has clearly seen it 20 times. It may be a bit of a stronger conversation with that client in regards to trying to get payment. Again, as I mentioned before, once payment is made, payment is tracked down here. Now, something that's important to note is that you can actually connect a payment portal such as PayPal or Authorize.net to PassConcept, which allows it to bear on those invoices a pay here button. This would allow your client to pay directly on that invoice rather than having to send you a check by mail. They can initiate payment through that button. Now, obviously, PayPal focuses primarily on either using a PayPal account or a credit card. And of course, they manage their own fees and such. And Authorize.net is similar, except they also allow for ACH transfers and all types of other payments to occur there. Now, this is essentially the billing area for this specific job. As I mentioned before, there are other tools and other modules that allow your billing department to view it holistically throughout the company. But as we're talking about project management, I did want to focus primarily on this area. Now, I see that we've just about run out of time. I do want to be respectful of your time. You guys signed up for an hour-long webinar. I don't want to take too much more time than that. If there are any additional questions, please, by all means, feel free to send them over by email. Obviously, we don't just exist within the time in which we do these webinars. We're here all the time to answer your questions and sort of field those. Also, if you're new to PassConcept and you'd like a personalized demo, please, by all means, we have our team here ready and able to present you with PassConcept and how it may be best suited for your specific company and if it perhaps is the right fit. And with that, thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We welcome any opportunity to talk about PassConcept. Thank you again. I'm going to leave the webinar kind of open a little bit in case there are any other questions that come in through the chat. But outside of that, thank you guys so much, and you guys have a great day. Thank you again.